Hey there, ready for another deep dive? Today we're digging into something we interact with every single day, but probably don't think much about: the ground beneath our feet. Believe it or not, soil moisture is a pretty fascinating and complex topic.
It really is. You wouldn't think that something as simple as how much water is in the soil could be so important.
Right. And we've got this research paper here that dives into the nitty-gritty of it all, using some seriously cutting-edge tech to measure and understand how all that water interacts with the land. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, this paper is a great example of how scientists are using new tools to unlock some of the secrets hidden right beneath our feet. And one of the things they highlight right off the bat is just how important it is to get accurate soil moisture data. We're talking about everything from agriculture to climate change.
I gotta admit, when I first heard we were doing a deep dive on soil moisture, I thought, how complicated can it be? Can't you just, like poke the ground and see how wet it feels? I'm guessing that's not how it works.
Lofts. I wish it were that simple. You see, soil isn't exactly uniform. It's constantly changing, even within small areas. Imagine trying to figure out how much water is in a giant sponge, but the sponge's texture keeps shifting. Sometimes it's dense, sometimes it's full of holes.
Okay, so it's like a constantly moving target.
Exactly. And that's what makes measuring soil moisture so tricky. It's not like measuring the water level in a lake. It's much more dynamic and variable.
Okay, I'm starting to see the challenge here. So how did the researchers in this paper tackle this ever-changing sponge problem? They were using something called a structural equation model combined with an artificial neural network, SEM-ANN for short. Does that mean anything to normal people?
It does sound pretty intimidating, right? But the basic idea is actually quite clever. Imagine SEM as like a flowchart. It maps out how different factors are all connected to soil moisture. Things like temperature, what kind of vegetation is present, even the slope of the land, all of it.
So kind of like a web of connections.
Exactly. Then the ANN comes in. It uses that flowchart, that web of connections, as a guide to learn from real-world data.
So it's like giving a detective a map of all the potential suspects and how they're connected before they start investigating a case, right?
Exactly. It helps them make sense of the clues, see the bigger picture.
A good map, or in this case, a good model, can make all the difference. So this SEM-ANN detective team, they did their thing. What kind of insights did they uncover? What did they find out about how all those factors actually influence soil moisture?
Well, this particular study focused on Inner Mongolia. They collected data in April and August, wanting to see how things changed between the spring and summer months. And what they found is that what really matters most for soil moisture, well, it actually changes depending on the time of year.
You got to be more specific. What drives those changes? Give me the details.
Okay. In the spring, they found that the biggest factor influencing soil moisture was something called the temperature-vegetation dryness index, TVDI for short. It basically tells you how thirsty the environment is, taking into account both temperature and how much plant life is around.
That's really cool. So if you're a farmer in a dry area, you could potentially use this TVDI data to anticipate irrigation needs earlier in the season, right?
Exactly. That's one of the exciting potential applications of this kind of research. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. In the summer, they found that it wasn't the TVDI that was most important, but land surface temperature itself. So what matters most in the spring isn't necessarily the same as what matters most in the summer.
Fascinating. So the relationship between these factors and moisture levels isn't static. It's evolving with the seasons. I'm guessing that makes predicting soil moisture a whole lot more complicated.
You got it. And this is especially important when you start thinking about climate change and all the ways it's messing with our planet's systems. As temperatures rise and weather patterns become less predictable, understanding those subtle shifts in soil moisture is going to be crucial for everything from agriculture to managing water resources.
Okay, so we're talking big picture stuff here. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm curious about one detail from the study. They mentioned that the model was more accurate in the spring than in the summer. Any theories as to why that might be? Too many variables in the summer, perhaps.
It's definitely possible. Think about it. More vegetation in the summer, more complex biological processes, more factors for the model to juggle. It highlights the fact that there's still so much we don't know. Yeah, it really does highlight that even with these fancy models and all this data, there are still a lot of mysteries to unravel when it comes to soil moisture.
That's science for you, right? Always more to learn. Speaking of which, we touched on this earlier, but I want to circle back to the practical applications of all this research. This isn't just theoretical, right? This knowledge about soil moisture has real-world implications.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just about building cool models. It's about using that knowledge to make a real difference, especially when you think about things like water resource management. That's huge.
Okay, paint me a picture. How could this research actually be used to make a difference in how we manage water?
Well, imagine you're a farmer trying to decide when and how much to water your crops. Using data from this type of model, especially when you combine it with local weather forecasts, you could pinpoint the absolute best times to irrigate.
So no more guesswork, just data-driven decisions for healthier crops.
Exactly. You save water, you save money, and you get the best possible yield. It's win-win-win.
That's incredible. And it's not just about agriculture, right?
Yeah.
What about other areas where soil moisture plays a role?
Right. Think about forests for a minute. With wildfire risks increasing, knowing how dry the soil is likely to become, well, that information is invaluable for guiding fire prevention efforts. It could help protect entire ecosystems.
Wow, the applications really are far-reaching. From individual farms to entire forests, this research could have a huge impact on how we manage resources in a changing world.
Absolutely. And speaking of a changing world, let's not forget about climate change. As temperatures continue to rise and weather patterns become less predictable, understanding soil moisture is going to be absolutely essential. It can help us predict droughts, floods, all sorts of extreme events, and hopefully mitigate their impacts.
It really highlights just how interconnected everything on our planet is. Changes in one area, like rising temperatures, can have these ripple effects on something as seemingly simple as the moisture in the soil, and that, in turn, impacts things like agriculture, wildfire risk. It's all connected.
It's a delicate balance, and this paper does a great job of showing us just how intricate those connections really are. Even something we walk on every day, something as seemingly simple as soil. It's full of complexity and wonder.
It really is amazing when you think about it. Now, you mentioned earlier that this research was conducted using a combination of optical and radar data, which sounds incredibly high-tech. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah.
What makes those different data sources so important?
Sure. So it all comes down to getting the most comprehensive picture possible, right? Optical data, the kind we get from satellites like Landsat, is really good for observing the Earth's surface. We can see vegetation cover, land surface temperature, which we've already talked about how important that is, and even get a sense of soil moisture from how light reflects off the ground.
Okay, so that's optical. What about radar? What does that bring to the table?
So radar is cool because it uses microwaves, and microwaves, unlike light, they can actually penetrate clouds and vegetation to some extent.
Ah, so even when it's cloudy, we can still get a reading.
Exactly. We can see beneath the surface, even through obstacles, which is essential when you're talking about something like soil moisture.
It's like having X-ray vision for the Earth.
Glass.
Yeah.
I like that. And by combining both optical and radar data, we get this really detailed and accurate understanding of what's happening beneath the surface. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy or if there's a lot of vegetation, we can see it all.
So it's like having two detectives working on the same case, each bringing their own unique skills and perspectives to the table.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with detectives, having multiple perspectives often leads to the most accurate conclusions.
I'm with you there. Now, this is all incredibly fascinating, but I think it's important to take a step back for a second and talk about why this matters for the average person. Because, let's be honest, not everyone listening is a scientist or a farmer. So for everyone out there who's thinking, why should I care about soil moisture? This is for you.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in all the technical details and forget about the bigger picture. But this research does have tangible implications for all of us. Take food security, for example.
Okay, I'll listen.
Soil moisture is the foundation of agriculture. It's what allows plants to grow and thrive. When farmers have access to accurate soil moisture information, they can make better decisions about when and how much to irrigate, which ultimately leads to improved crop yields.
And improved crop yields mean a more stable and sustainable food supply for everyone, right?
Exactly. And that's more important than ever in a world facing climate change and a growing population.
Absolutely. So food security is a big one. What else? What are some of the other reasons why the average person should care about this research?
Well, think about water in general, not just for agriculture, but clean, drinkable water for everyone. Understanding soil moisture is crucial for managing groundwater resources. It helps us predict and prevent things like droughts and floods, which directly impacts the availability and quality of our water supply.
So whether you're a farmer, a city planner, or just someone who enjoys a nice, refreshing glass of water every now and then, this research has something for you. It's about protecting our planet and ensuring a sustainable future for everyone.
Well said. It underscores how interconnected our planet is, and how even the smallest things, like the amount of moisture in the soil, can have ripple effects on a global scale.
It really makes you appreciate the intricate workings of nature, doesn't it?
It really does.
So we've talked a lot about the importance of this data, but I'm curious about the logistics. How is soil moisture information actually collected and used in the real world? What does that process look like?
That's a great question. In the past, soil moisture measurements were primarily taken manually. We're talking about people going out into the field with instruments called soil moisture probes.
Soil moisture probes. What are those?
They're basically these metal probes that you insert into the ground at specific depths, and they give you a direct measurement of the moisture content at that particular spot.
I can see how that would be pretty time consuming, not to mention physically demanding.
It is, especially if you're trying to monitor soil moisture over a large area. Plus, manually collecting data can be prone to human error and inconsistencies. That's where technology comes in.
So what's the modern solution? We're talking about soil moisture on a massive scale, right?
Yeah.
How do you even begin to collect that much data without relying on people with probes?
Well, that's where our friend remote sensing comes in. Remember we were talking about satellites and all the amazing data they can collect? Turns out they're also really good at measuring soil moisture.
Really, from space?
Yeah, these satellites have specialized sensors that can detect moisture levels from orbit. And because they're constantly circling the globe, they can cover vast areas much faster and more consistently than any ground-based method.
That's incredible. So no more trekking through fields with probes.
Well, not quite. While remote sensing is a game changer, we still need those ground-based measurements, those trusty probes, to make sure everything is calibrated correctly. Think of it as a two-pronged approach.
Ah, so the satellites give us the big picture, the overall trends, and the ground measurements help fine-tune the details, make sure everything's accurate.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting. Scientists are taking all this data, both from satellites and ground measurements, and combining it with sophisticated computer models. Remember that SEM-ANN approach we talked about earlier? That's one example of how we can use these models to make sense of massive amounts of data.
So we're not just collecting data for the sake of it, we're actually using it to create something even more powerful.
Precisely. These models take into account all sorts of factors, like vegetation cover, what the terrain looks like, even weather patterns, and they can use all that information to create these incredibly detailed maps of soil moisture.
Wow, so we're not just getting a snapshot in time. We're seeing how things change over time, almost like having a crystal ball, but for soil moisture.
Exactly. It's like we're peeling back the layers of the earth and revealing these hidden dynamics that we could never see before.
It sounds like we're on the verge of a soil moisture revolution. This technology has the potential to change everything.
It really does. Think about all the areas we've already talked about: agriculture, forestry, water resource management. Having access to this kind of detailed soil moisture information could revolutionize those fields.
It could help us make better decisions, allocate resources more effectively, and ultimately create a more sustainable future. All because we took the time to understand something as seemingly simple as the amount of water in the soil.
It's amazing, isn't it? This tiny detail, this hidden world beneath our feet, it has these massive implications for our planet and everything on it. And that's what I hope listeners take away from this deep dive. Soil moisture matters. It impacts the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. It's all connected.
It's a good reminder that even in our high-tech world, we're still deeply connected to the natural world. And understanding those connections, those intricate relationships, is more important than ever.
I completely agree.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to resurface from this deep dive into the fascinating world of soil moisture. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. As you're walking around today, take a moment to appreciate the ground beneath your feet. Because hidden beneath that surface is a world of complexity and wonder, a world that plays a vital role in all our lives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.